Om Parthaya Pradibodhidam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Grathidam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaidam Rudavarshinim Bhagavadim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatva Manusantadhami Bhagavad Gite Bhavadveshinim Yem Brahma Varunendra Rudramaruda Stunnanti Divyaistavaihi Vedai Sankalpa Kramopanishadai Gayanti Yam Samagaha Dhyana Vastita Tadgadena Manasa Pashyanti Yam Yogino Yasyandam Navidusura Suraganaha Devaya Tasmai Namaha. We are dealing with the sixth chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, and in the last session we discussed the first three verses, and the third verse, the third sloka was ārurukṣhoḥ mune yogam karma karanam uchyade yoga-ārūḍhasya tasyaiva shama karanam uchyade. So these are the two stages that every spiritual seeker has to go through in his spiritual journey. The first stage is called ārurukṣhoḥ. Ārurukṣhoḥ is a spiritual seeker who wants to step into spiritual life, who is about to begin his spiritual journey. Now, during that stage, he has to work hard along with the other daily obligations. He has to practice spiritual disciplines, and he has to bring in a new approach, a new perspective to his life as a whole. So when you are not much concerned about the spiritual values, we normally do things with great enthusiasm, with a great energy, with a sense of a strong motive, self-identification. Well, this is my job, I have to do this work, and I'm the one who is going to enjoy the results of this work. Enjoy or suffer depending upon the consequences. So that's what we normally do. A spiritual seeker he will try to bring into his life, into his activities, a new approach, a new perspective. He will start doing everything with a sense of sanctity and sacredness and devotion, but with a degree of detachment. That detachment is a new spiritual element. It is not indifference, it is not negligence. It is an attitude of offering everything, the work and also its result, to God. He will have to be vigilant, he will have to be active, he will have to be enthusiastic, because spiritual practices require a lot of enthusiasm. It's not just sitting back, remaining inactive, no. Even to pray and meditate and make it a daily part of our life, we have to be very alert and we have to be very enthusiastic. There are many obstacles like laziness, reluctance, lack of conviction, negativity, and all these negative samskaras can create obstacles, which are called antarayas in the yoga tradition. There are 9 antarayas. And one constant obstacle is a lack of conviction we may begin our spiritual practice with great enthusiasm. We may not be able to sustain it. Frequently, when there is an objection, an obstacle, an objection from those around you, or an obstacle from circumstances, we may feel like withdrawing from spiritual values. So at that time we have to be strong-willed, enthusiastic, and we need a strong determination to remove obstacles, to go beyond obstacles. The next stage is called ārūḍha. That is a person who has attained concentration, attained yoga, who has reached a substantial level, a high level of concentration, control over the senses, etc. At that stage, shamakaranam uchyate. You need not worry much about enthusiasm, persistence, sustaining your spiritual disciplines and all that, because you are already have attained a degree of perfection. As a spiritual life becomes natural at that stage. So you do not have to bring in special effort to stick to spiritual path. There are fewer obstacles. So you are able to move along the spiritual path with relative ease. That stage is called ārūḍha. So at that stage, we need not work hard to stick to spiritual path, because we instinctively follow spiritual values, and spiritual way of life becomes natural to us. So when it becomes natural to us, we are able to enjoy practicing spiritual values. And when we begin to enjoy living a spiritual life, then 90% of the battle is over. This internal spiritual battle is over. Because when we enjoy living a spiritual life, it has become natural to us. Now, these are the early part of the 6th chapter. In the 4th verse of the 6th chapter, Lord Krishna says, Yadahi na indriyartheshu na karmasu anushajyade sarva sankalpa sannyasi yoga-ārūḍhastadochyade. When there is absolutely no attachment either to sense objects or to actions, because you are completely given up all sankalpas, then you have reached the highest yoga state. So that's the meaning here. So the word sankalpa we already discussed. Nahi asanyasta sankalpo yogi bhavadi kaschana. In the 2nd verse it says, Yam sannyasam edi prahu yogam tam vidhi pandava nahi asanyasta sankalpo yogi bhavadi kaschana. So who is a man of renunciation, who is a yogi? It says, a person who gives up all sankalpas. All in Sanskrit we call, 2 technical terms are used, katrutva and bhoktrutva. I am doing this work. I am the doer. So when we identify ourselves with a work, then we are actually walking into a trap. Our mind will be always concerned with the consequences of our actions. So that will create a lot of anxiety, a lot of worry. All these worries, negativity, anxiety, all these put together are called sankalpas. So when we identify ourselves with the work we do, then we will have to identify ourselves with the results of the work we have to do. It is the concern or worry about the results that create this prison wall in life. It is actually an unnecessary burden, really speaking. When we do a work, the work will automatically, naturally will produce a result. So this worry is an invisible thread. Worry or concern or anxiety, these are the place of the mind. And they are the results of sankalpas. So a great man, a great spiritual seeker, a highly accomplished spiritual teacher will be able to do a tremendous lot of work without feeling any exhaustion. Of course, the body will naturally have to face the problems because body is made of 5 elements. So the virus, the environment, the heat and cold, the food, water, all these will have an effect on the body which is made of 5 elements. That will be there. But his mind will be totally free from worries and anxieties and concerns and complaints because all sankalpas are gone. So if we can work without sankalpa, then we will be able to do a lot of work. We will be able to work without anxiety. And remember, anxieties and sankalpas do not improve the quality of the results of the work. They are not a necessary ingredient of work. It is just play of the mind, mostly imaginations. So, Lord Krishna says, Nahi asannista sankalpaha yogi bhavati kaschana. So a real yogi here means a spiritual man, a spiritual person. So in a very broad sense, in a generic sense, a yogi or sannyasi, these two terms are used in these verses. A man of renunciation, a man who has renounced his ego, who has renounced his desires, is a person who has renounced and given up all his sankalpas, all his worries, all his thoughts, all his concerns, all his different kinds of identifications. So such a person will be able to do work without any sankalpa. So Lord Krishna says, a real yogi, he has renounced all sankalpas because there is no attachment. He is not attached either to sense objects or to actions. Yadahi na indriyartheshu na karmasu anusajjati. He is not attached either to his senses and he is not attached to his actions. Because the senses naturally flow to the sense objects. And when they flow to sense objects, they carry our mind. When the sense of sight sees a visual object, it drags the mind towards the visual object. Then the mind gets attached to it. And this attachment will create sankalpas, desires, and desires will create agentship, kartrutva and bhoktrutva, and naturally that will lead to sankalpas. So a really evolved spiritual person will be free from all these sankalpas. So sarva sankalpa sannyasi yoga-ārūḍha. A yoga-ārūḍha is a person who has attained to yoga and concentration, who is an advanced person, who has left behind the stage of ārurukṣhoḥ and who has reached the stage of yoga-ārūḍha. Such a person is totally free from all sankalpas. Sarva sankalpa sannyasi is a man of renunciation. So, a man of renunciation means a man or a woman, a spiritual seeker who has completely freed himself or herself from sankalpas, from worries about consequences. So, a person who has taken the spiritual practice in that higher sense is called a Yoga-ārūḍha. At that stage, he endures spiritual life. Even if yoga, shama is necessary, because the shama actually is a higher quality than karma. But shama will take him only up to Yoga-ārūḍha. Such a person becomes a Yoga-ārūḍha only when he reaches a stage when he has given up all kinds of identifications with actions and their results. So what are the two important characteristics of a man who has attained that state of yoga or a concentration or spiritual evolution? It's called Yoga-ārūḍha. One is he will have no interest in sense objects or worldly matters. Secondly, he has no interest in external activities. Third, he will be totally free from all sankalpas. So total detachment. Now, how do we reach this stage? As I mentioned, you become a Yoga-ārūḍha at the second stage of a spiritual evolution. First, we become ārurukṣhoḥ. Ārurukṣhoḥ means somebody who wants to enter into spiritual path. In the broad sense, let us say, those who go to temples or churches or spiritual places for prayer and meditation, for those who want to read holy books with the great concentration, or those who want to lead a very disciplined life. The strong desire, a strong willingness to make the sacrifices, to begin a spiritual life. Let us say, such a person is called ārurukṣhoḥ. Now, at that stage, mind will not easily allow you to enter the spiritual path. Mind will create some invisible mental blocks. Just as this is most frequently found in the case of people afflicted by drug addiction, gambling, alcoholism, and many such obsessive negativities, so to speak. There are many of them who want to get out of this problem and who want to lead a new life. And they have a sincere interest and they enjoy a lot when they attend a prayer or when they listen to spiritual ideas. But after some time, their mind goes back to their natural instinctive habits, going back to old habits. So just like the pendulum of a clock that moves between two extremes. As Patanjali's system, yoga system, will call it vikshiptam manaha. That of course that term is used by Vyasa, who is the commentator of Patanjali's system. A mind that moves from one end to the opposite end. On the one hand, you want to lead a spiritual life. And you are very sincere. But on the other hand, mind automatically goes back to the old habits. It's not steady. Just like if this is suppose it's insects or flies, it wants to sit on a beautiful flower, enjoy the beautiful smell of a flower, or maybe the sweet honey of a flower. And it enjoys that. and suppose it decides, well, in future, I will only fly about, move about in the garden, only sitting on flowers, enjoying the wonderful smell and the sweet honey of the flower. But after some time, it moves and sits on dirt and field. And again, after some time, again it comes back to the flower garden. Like that, the mind has a tendency to go back to the old habits, because the mind has already acquired a lot of undesirable characteristics which are already there, accumulated in the mental system called chittam. So it will be looking for similar things outside. Our mind will be looking, seeking in external world what it has already stored up in itself. If our mind is totally free from wrong sankalpas, wrong impressions, wrong samskaras, wrong vasanas, wrong or undesirable impressions, then mind will not go in search of undesirable things. Our mind normally has a lot of wonderful ideas in us: compassion, goodness, charity, many spiritual ideas we have. That's why our mind automatically flows towards spiritual ideas, can identify with spiritual ideas, can enjoy associating with spiritual persons or spiritual places, feeling at home when you are in a spiritual place, because the mind has already got a huge storage of positive ideas, wonderful ideas. But there are also, unfortunately, a storage of undesirable samskaras and impressions in mind. So when you are away from a wonderful place, a spiritual place, then mind will also be moving towards undesirable objects. So whatever we have in our mind, that we seek outside, good and also bad, unfortunately. That state of mind is called vikshipta manaha. So that is the first stage in the spiritual life of any person, ārurukṣhoḥ. So at that stage, we should try to increase the storage of positive spiritual samskaras. And when we increase the storage of the accumulation of positive samskaras, positive impressions, then mind will be less and less inclined to go in search of undesirable things. It will be seeking only for positive samskaras outside. Because the world presents both good and bad. The world is a mixture of both. It is for us to decide. So if we increase more and more of spiritual samskaras, spiritual impressions, then our mind will automatically will be seeking those spiritual things, spiritual objects in the external world. A man who is always thinking of God, who has a huge storage of spiritual ideas in his mental system, will be looking for similar things outside. When he reads a book, that book will be a book that will help him, will encourage him in his advancement of spiritual life. When he meets people, he would like to meet with people whose association will be an inspiration to him in spiritual life. So that is how we evolve from ārurukṣhoḥ state, the state of the primary stage of desiring to lead a spiritual life, to the next advanced stage of having attained spirituality in life. It is called ārūḍha state. Then there is a well-known verse, 5th verse uddhared atmana atmanam na atmanam avasadayet atmaiva hyatmano bandhu atmaiva tripuratmanaha. So we already saw in the last verse that if we can increase our spiritual samskaras, spiritual impressions, that will help us to quickly evolve in spiritual life. So that means we are not, or a man is not a creation of circumstances. Our actions or activities are not necessarily determined by circumstances, but to a greater degree, our activities, our character are determined by the samskaras, because the world presents both what we have in our mind. Our samskaras help us to choose and to choose what is positive and to filter out what is negative. And even when we have to encounter situations and circumstances which may create problems, then we can practice the spiritual technique of non-identification, which is called non-attachment. We already say, yadahi na indriyartheshu na karmasu anusajjade. That is, when there is no attachment. In other words, when we are not attached, then what happens? We are able to renounce all sankalpas. We will attain the higher stage of Yoga-ārūḍha. So, being not attached means not identifying ourselves with all that we find in the world, external world, different samskaras, different circumstances. Now, but how do we confront ourselves? I mean, the next verse takes us deeper into our own inner world. 5th verse, uddhared atmanatmanam na atmanam avasadiyet atmaiva hyatmano bandhu atmaiva tripuratmanaha. So you can find here the word atma is used in so many different senses. That means atma is sometimes used buddhi, is used as mind, and sometimes is used as jivatma. The central theme of the 5th verse is, if we are not under the control of the senses, rather if our mind is not within the control of the senses, if the mind is able to control the senses without being controlled by the senses, then our mind is closer to Atman. Then our mind becomes our friend. In fact, that idea is expressed in more forceful language in the coming verses. Our mind becomes our worst enemy when our mind begins to wander, when our mind goes in search of whatever it wants. It sees a visual object because the eyes will drag the mind towards that visual object, or the ears may drag the mind towards the object through hearing. The sense of hearing, the ears will drag the mind. Similarly, all the 5 senses are simultaneously dragging the mind towards various sense objects. Shabdadabhi panchabhireva pancha panchattamapaso gunena baddhaha kuranga madanga padanka minaha bhringa nara panchabhiranchidakim. We discussed this earlier on many occasions, but this particular verse has got a special relationship with that well-known sloka in Shankaracharya's Viveka Chudamani. Shabdadvi panchabhireva pancha, panchattama pasuggunena patthaha. How we all become praised, we become imprisoned by our own senses. That terrible tragedy is most graphically described in this verse. So 5 representatives from the animal kingdom are taken: the deer, the elephant, then the moth, fish, and some insects moving in the garden. So these 5 creatures are taken as examples of how senses present this death trap before us. So in olden days in India, the hunters used to play on some primitive musical instrument, and hearing this, a deer hiding inside a bush or a cave will come out, and because it is attracted by the beautiful sound coming from that primitive musical instrument, it comes out, it is attracted, and it is killed by the hunter. The hunter shoots an arrow and the deer is killed. The sense of hearing becomes death trap for the poor creature. The elephants, they move in groups, touching each other. The sense of touch becomes death trap, the road leading to death. And as they forget themselves, they get caught, they fall into a pit, and they are caught and killed or enslaved. So the sense of touch becomes death trap for the elephants. And the moths, these insects that emerge in large numbers during rainy season, they see a blazing fire in their front, and they are caught, they are attracted by the sense of sight. So they think this blazing fire is something attractive, and they move towards this fire, and they are killed in large numbers. Then fish, they are cheated by their taste. They eat the bait and they are caught by the fishermen and killed. And then the creatures that move in the garden, certain bees, they are attracted by the beautiful smell, the sense of smell. At that time, other creatures come and kill them. So what happens here? And then Shankaracharya says, Nara Panjabhiranchita Kim, what to speak of human beings? Because human beings are simultaneously, all the time, every moment, caught and attracted by these sense objects. Because all the 5 sense traps are active all the moment, every moment in the life of a human being. Even when we are talking, we'll be seeing different things, hearing different things. So what happens in every moment, our 5 senses are dragging the mind towards various sense objects. A real yogi will be able to focus his mind exclusively on what he is doing. That's why yogis or spiritual persons are able to accomplish great things, because their senses are perfectly under control, which means their mind is perfectly able to control the senses, and such a mind is in perfect harmony with buddhi, intellect, and that intellect is linked to Atman. So what happens? Mana, but his mind, buddhi or intellect, and Atman are perfectly in control, in harmony with each other. Otherwise, what happens if we give complete license to our senses? Then the senses will become our worst enemies. Why? Because the senses will make our mind our worst enemy. Our mind will turn against us the moment we allow the senses to control our mind. And once we allow our mind to be controlled by the senses, thereby allowing the mind itself to become our enemy, then our intellect also will be our enemy, because there will be an imbalance, an internal imbalance in our personality. And that is the real cause for many of the internal conflicts that go very deep in spiritual life. That's why when we try to practice spiritual values, there is this imbalance. We are actually trying to bring a sense of control to the activities of the senses by strengthening our mind with good samskaras, so that the mind will be able to control the senses, so the mind will not be controlled by the senses. So this effort can create some internal conflicts at the beginning of a spiritual life. When you try to meditate, you find suddenly mind will throw up all kinds of internal conflicts. That's because we are trying to bring in sense of control to our own personality by trying to strengthen the mind, by trying to accumulate more spiritual samskaras. But we should persist, and that is the only way to become an ārūṛukshoḥ. So what this particular sloka tells you is this. That is, of course, the word self is used. So you find here, uddhared atmana atmanam, na atmanam avasadayed, atmaiva hi atmana bandhu, atmaiva ripuratmanaha. That means when mind and senses and ego are to be completely conquered, then what happens? When they are completely under control, then what happens? We are able to lift ourselves, we are able to raise ourselves to the highest spiritual experience. If we don't do that, what happens? Na atmanam avasadayed. I mean, a spiritual seeker should lift himself, should uplift himself by his own self. Strong confidence, the ability to control, the ability and self-confidence in our ability to raise ourselves in spiritual life. That is very important. We should not weaken our mind. Now the point is that there is a force of expression, na atmanam avasadayed. That means when a person reaches a stage, when he tries to withdraw himself from external objects, what happens? There is an opportunity. There is a risk and danger of his becoming a bit careless. So there's a very important. It's a psychological point, a deep psychological insight you find. When we try to practice self-restraint, self-control, by trying to focus on spiritual activities alone, by trying to withdraw our mind from external sense objects, which create a lot of problems because they increase our desire. When we try to practice self-restraint, there is always a risk and danger. And there's a misunderstanding. What happens, we may become inactive and careless. That's why when we practice self-restraint, we need a counter-focus. That's very important. When we try to move away from the world of senses, at the beginning, we must have another destination towards which we must move. So at that time, we must try to increase spiritual practices like prayer, meditation, reading holy scriptures, association with spiritual persons, an active interest in spiritual literature. All these are important. Otherwise, the mind has a tendency to become somewhat dull. It loses its focus. In fact, Lord Krishna, with a great spiritual and psychological insight, once said, na buddhi vedam janayed ajnanam karma sankinam. This is very important for the beginners. Both these verses, na buddhi vedam janayed ajnanam karma sankinam. There are people who are very active, doing a lot of work with a lot of identification. They should not all of a sudden start practicing self-restraint on one foot good morning. All of a sudden, they should not do that. Why? Because normally we can do things, we can go about doing our duties and responsibilities only when we have a plan, when we have something to attain, when we have a definite plan, a deadline, then only we will direct our energies and actions towards that goal, towards that end. When suddenly you take away that goal by practicing self-restraint, all of a sudden, without slowly moving towards a counter focus, what happens, our mind may suddenly go blank. That's why it is said, na atmanam avasadayet. So at the beginning, what happens, people in the name of spirituality may become effeminate, inactive, allowing themselves to be trampled over by the world. All these things could happen in the name of being mild, in the name of being inactive. Remember, that kind of self-restraint, without proper direction, without preparing our mind in a scientific way, what happens now? That can throw the mind into a world of tamas. Mind may suddenly become tamasic. That is very risky. So that's why it is said, a spiritual seeker who is trying to enter into spiritual life, and then who has a plan, who has a strong desire to become a yoga-ārūḍha, an advanced person in spiritual life, such a person should practice karma yoga, should have some interest in spiritual literature, should have a sense of self-confidence, and should always produce a counter focus, present a counter focus for his natural activities. An interest in spiritual literature, in philosophy, in the lives reading, the lives, the stories, parables, teachings of great spiritual persons and saints. All these will slowly strengthen the mind, and then mind will slowly be free from the pull of the senses. Mind will be slowly able to control the senses. Such a mind will naturally be in perfect harmony with buddhi or intellect, and when we reach that stage, then self-restraint become very comprehensive, and it becomes really effective. So that's why na atmanam avasadayet. This is a very important point, remember. Second point is, only self-effort can enable us to raise ourselves from the stage of being a slave of circumstances. This is important. That's the importance of, uddharet, means raise yourself. So a spiritual seeker will need a strong will, a strong determination, an ability to have a strong sense of self-confidence. If you read the life, study the lives of the great saints and mystics of various religious traditions, you can see this happening. They were men and women of tremendous self-confidence. They were not huge muscular fellows moving about with shouting and throwing their weight about. Many of them were very humble, very humble. Many of the great saints and mystics were very humble. But behind that humility, there was a great strength. And that strength was the strength of Atman. It's called Atma Balam. So beyond that Atma Balam, the strength of Atman, the self, is far superior to the strength of body and even mind or intellect. So that is the importance of the word Uddhared Atmanatmanam. So one should raise oneself to a higher level in spiritual life by one's own self-effort. Uddhared. You should raise. Uddhared means you are lifting something that fallen into the well, you lift it up, you are uplifting it. So one should try to uplift oneself by one's own effort. That self-confidence is what actually makes us worthy of God's grace. That's a very important thing. People sometimes will think, well, God will give me everything. Well, God may give us, but what we get may not be ours when we are not fit to receive them. So in order to make ourselves fit for receiving God's grace, we need to make self-effort. So Uddhared Atmanatmanam. That's why the great epoch makers of the world, mystics, they were all men and women of tremendous, unbelievable inner strength. A man like Vivekananda. Sri Ramakrishna, his guru, he admired Vivekananda because he found Vivekananda was a young man when he first met his guru, man of tremendous self-confidence, inner strength. That is very much needed. That's why when Lord Krishna gives a list of the essential characteristics of a true devotee, he says, Santushta Satatam Yogi Yadatma Dridhanishchega. Santushta means fully contented. Yatatma, the one who has controlled his senses. Dridhanishchega means a person who has strong determination. Because a strong determination, it brings out our inner resources. That's a very important psychological point we should remember. When we do not have a strong determination, what happens is our inner strength, our inner resources will remain unutilized. It drains away our resources, mental resources, if we do not have self-confidence. Self-confidence will make our mind vulnerable to negativity, doubts, lethargy, and weakness. On the other hand, a positive attitude based on self-confidence will bring out the inner resources that are lying behind the surface of our mind. That's why this positive attitude is very important. Raise oneself by oneself. Uddhared Atmana Atmanam. Na Atmanam avasadayed. We should not allow ourselves to be controlled by the senses, controlled by the mind which may be controlled by the senses. Because if we allow ourselves to be controlled, a mind which is again controlled by the senses, what is happening is we become slave of our own senses, and that leads to catastrophe and spiritual disaster. That's why it is important, Uddhared Atmanatmanam. People may fumble, they may make mistakes, they may have sometimes setbacks in spiritual life. They may feeling, well, I had this misfortune, so But a man of positive attitude will think, well, I have this misfortune, but I will overcome it. That is why uddharet atmanatmanam. So that's very important. Even from a psychological point of view, from the point of spiritual psychology, it's important that a strong will, a strong determination will be essential for us to face the obstacles that we have to face, not only from external world, but also from our own mind. Our own mind may create challenges. In order to face the problems, in order to win this inner battles going on within our own mind, in order to face the problems that our own mind may put before us, it is important to have a strong mind and strong self-confidence. That's why uddharet atmana atmanam. One should try to uplift oneself by his own effort. And once we make our own effort, then you find God also will come to assist us. Unless we make our own effort, we will not become grace worthy. We will be able to make use of God's grace only when we become fit to, when we become grace worthy, when we become fit to recognize God's grace as God's grace and use it for our own life. So we'll continue the discussion next week. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.